Recorder rolling, and 3, 2, 1. I've known Carlo through a common friend, a dear friend. Carlo is the guy that you really need to know. The first time we met at dinner, it felt like a breakup, as there was so much to say that it felt really wrong to leave the table. Carlo is like a Chinese box. Every time you speak to him, something surprising comes out. I love to argue with Carlo, sometimes very hardly, but Carlo every time can find a way to find the right solution to whatever discussion we have. My name is Gianluca Cinquepalmi. You are listening to GLC Live, my podcast dedicated to business design. I'm an educator, design entrepreneur, and best-selling author. This show is dedicated to designers, creatives, and entrepreneurs that, like me, want to inspire, challenge, and disrupt the business and design industry. In this episode, Leadership with No Leader, with Carlo Giardinetti. Ciao Carlo.
Ciao Gianluca.
So, Carlo, thank you so much for coming into the show and welcome. And one of the things that I remember the first time we met, you told me that you were now in your third or fourth life. So, the man with many lives. Can you tell me a little bit about all the phases of your life?
It is one life, but it's many professional lives inside. Yes, I mean, in a nutshell, I started with this passion for football. I was like 3 years old, but I became a professional footballer in Italy. At the age of 13, I had to leave my hometown, Rome, to go and play for Atalanta in Bergamo, here in Italy. And that was my life until 22 and a half. I had a bad injury on my knee, and that disrupted that first life. But it was probably the best opportunity for me. That's been the moment I've done it for the first time. Okay, you can change what you thought it was going to be your life passion forever and ever, and then circumstances happen and you must change. And I started a very fast growing career in hospitality. I became general manager of hotels and resorts around the world with a very fast growing career. And I was in Egypt, in Kenya, in Tanzania, in the Maldives, in Ukraine, in Italy. Very interesting chapter of my life that lasted 10 years. And then when I decided to marry, who's today my wife, mother of our 3 children, she told me, if you actually want to marry me, you have to get a proper job.
That's a funny one.
I'm not sure what she meant by that. She didn't like me being hotels and all of that. So I said, you know what? I've done it once. I'm going to do it twice another time. And that's, I went to study an MBA, and from there an opportunity came up, and I became an educator. I came to Switzerland, and I'm in Switzerland now since 2012. Started to work in education, and then it's the schools. And today I'm just about to get across the fourth life, as I started to collaborate also with a major consulting company, with Deloitte, on leadership and human capital. So life is interesting.
It is, always is. So looking at your super fascinating background, you always had to deal with very diverse group of people. And, you know, as a footballer, you had to be part of a team, like the classical, literal definition of team. And then when you were working in hospitality, is always looking at the client or at the guest, which is the best example. I love when I coach people in hospitality that they always say, oh, our guest is such a beautiful interaction, right? And then now in education and then consulting, is it there where you started developing this deep knowledge, I would say, in heterogenic teams and teaming and teams? Is that where it started, or? there was a actual
It's a good
pivotal
one.
moment?
It's a good question. Look, I think my plan when I will turn eventually 50 plus is to try and write a book, if anything, for myself, reflecting back on learning exactly. Ask me now, when did you start? When did I start getting comfortable with change? When did I start learning about teams? And it's a long process to reflect on these things, as you well know. It's not really a straightforward answer necessarily. But my best answer to that is I never felt I've been particularly good in team as Carlo,
Okay.
No. But what I remember very well since the beginning as a footballer was there is a difference between being able to perform well in a team and being a likable guy, let's say.
Nice.
The emotional part and the practical part are not necessarily, they don't have to be so consistent.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And football reminded me that. I mean, we were ready to eat each other, even not only with opposite team, but even within the team on the pitch, because we all had this. But that didn't mean that we were not actually very good at coordinating with each other and performing a win in the game.
Sure.
So it was interesting to reflect that the what you need to put into the team effort is far beyond only performance, and it's far beyond only getting along. It's an interesting mix of the two, and the dynamics are not just always the same, something that you can find on the shelf and it works for everybody else. It's very human working in teams.
It is. And nowadays that we do have these amazing technologies that connects us, and we can find informations and case studies, and you can work with somebody in India or in China. And for the past 10 years I was in Hong Kong, and I was working constantly with European and US companies very easily in a way. But it seems that there are a couple of things, and leadership is one of them, that are stuck in the past. There is still this model of, I'm the boss, so you must do what I say, and whatever I say is right. Sometimes you meet people that are a little bit more inspiring, but the models are still very, very present. Even great leaders and very successful leaders, there is still this model that is a top-down model. So there are the managers, then the middle managers, and then the executors, and then if there is a board or there is a group of people leading, why is that? Why can't we evolve in a way in our leadership models when we are evolving in so many other models?
Yeah, it's again, it's a great question to look at. One thing that really helped me addressing this question is going back to leadership and understanding, okay, what do we need by leading, and what is leadership, right? And it really helps to make a difference or a turning leading people from leading work, because people get really trapped in the paradigm of leading people, and leading people is messy, it's human, it's emotional, it's it has a lot of stuff in between. It depends on my mood today and the other person's mood today. I can tell you, can mess up everything else, even just emotional, right, components and personal development, where I am as a leader, where are you as a professional. But leading work should be brought back to the center of the attention, especially in business. I think if we focus on management and leading the work, we understand that actually we can lead great work without getting stuck at hierarchies and having to put authority and power in place to get things done. Because a lot of work is actually already happening everywhere in the world through dynamics that are not, I tell you what to do and you do what I told you, and if not at all. There's so much work that is getting done with very different dynamics. So that discernment between leading work and leading people, it's a good place to start, in my opinion. Answer this question of evolving leadership models.
And also, I noticed that sometimes when you're saying leading work is also most of the time a lack of clarity, of direction, because even we all know that the company needs to make money, and that's okay, perfect. That's the definition of business, but that's a consequence of your actions, right? So there are so many ways that you can do that. The difference is what is the path that you are taking to go towards that direction. And sometimes when it happened to me when I was consulting or helping people find their true north. We call it the North Star metric, no? Or the only metric that matters for that sake. And you can see that a lot of corporations don't have that. They know that they need to make money, but most of the time that is not the actual metric that matters. Because I make this analogy, and we are Italian, so we must do a car analogy. So, the gasoline that goes into the car, that's the money. But the navigational system and the direction and the input of the GPS, that's the strategy, that's the direction. And then you also have the gauges that tells you if you have enough fuel, if you have enough oil, if you have enough brakes or pressure tires. And with this simple example, sometimes we have to rethink the way that we approach this idea of leadership. And I was super fascinated when we talked about two of your, I would say, passions maybe. One was we discussed about this amazing book that you wrote, the preface for in the Italian version, and I would love to hear about that. Fearless Company, I believe, is in English.
The Fearless Organization.
The Fearless Organization.
By Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School. Yeah.
And that was amazing to read your preface. And then the concept that was totally new to me, and you explain it so interestingly, of holacracy, which is what you were discussing before. So can you give me a nutshell about this new way of leading, and maybe there is also the episode of leaders leading without leaders, right?
Yeah. Holacracy is a very interesting system that I have experienced for 3 years, and I studied, and I think that there's a lot to learn from it. Today, if I have to say, it is not what I would suggest everybody to go for, not at all. But okay. I think it's something that I would suggest everybody to learn from. And one of the reasons why I love holacracy as a system, and I'm going to spend maybe a minute or two to explain what that is. But before I get there, is really leadership and leading work. What I mean by that is, if you are in the business of leading work instead of leading people, you understand that to lead work, there are, like I was saying before, different tools you can use. And structure and clarity, exactly what you were saying before, and transparency become your new tools. So instead, in a typical archaic leadership style, me as a boss, I withhold a lot of information because that's privilege for me and power for me. And I only distribute little pieces of information to people by telling them, you need to do A, B, and C. And that's all you need to know. And that's all you need to do. That's a typical way to. Now, in this new type of leadership, you are actually take your leader role as somebody who enable others to do their job in the best way possible. So if you are in the business of enabling others, not telling others what to do, enabling others, what you need to give them is information, structure, and support. So it's very different. You give them structure that enables them, which means you give them perhaps objectives, you give them a time frame, you give them opportunity to connect with people necessarily in their network to do that job at the best. And you give them all information that you would normally withhold with you, you give it to them. And that is empowering them to do their job at the best. Then, how do you lead the person? So the support that I was talking about, that is more like a coach. So that is where you're leading people, but you're not leading people by telling them what to do. You're leading people by supporting them where they get stuck for whatever reason, because we know that managing tasks and managing team, it's complicated. So holacracy is interesting as a system because it removes completely the management function of managing people. It's a system where nobody manage anybody else, but everybody manage a piece of work. So everybody has tasks and has a job description that says what I'm supposed to do. And then you are completely empowered within the structure of your role to do everything you think should be done without having another person that say, oh no, you have to do it like this or you have to do it like that. It's interesting because, of course, what happens when people are given all that empowerment and all that freedom to act, it's a little bit of a lottery out there. Not everybody reacts the same to all that freedom. So that's where maybe some limitations are also there, of course, in a system like that. But it's quite exciting to experiment that new paradigm.
It is. And I was reading a book by Derek... I forgot his last name. It's called Anything You Want, and he's the founder of CD Baby, and he became a speaker, and it was wonderful. And he was saying that because he was focusing a lot on the growth of, he wanted to provide to his clients, which were musicians, and he was a musician, the best service as possible. He really didn't like the idea of having a big business. He wanted to keep the business small, lean, and at service to the musicians. And at one point in the book, it's fascinating because he said he delegated everything. And at one point he had, I believe, 50 or 60 employees. And they started saying, oh, we would like to have a reward program or stuff like that, or return on the investment. And he said, okay, whatever, sure. And then his accountant came back and said, so basically, all the revenues of the companies are going back to the people, because you didn't control what kind of a reward you were giving. And in this little book he explained this idea of you can give only so much control, but in this case I believe there was a misconception of setting the boundaries within that and say, okay, guys, like you said, I think what you said before is fundamentally is essential, which is the clarity of message. I say, okay, this company needs to make this amount of money so that we can survive, and these are the boundaries that we have, and we want people to act in a certain way. But I notice in a lot of companies, I'm working with a fair amount of startups now, and you see that there are so many different kind of leaders in a way, because you go from the startup where the CEO or the managing director is, allow me the term, the super tech guy that had that vision, that had that genius, of starting whatever, a disruptive app or a service, etc. And now with all the changes and the shift in the market, they are struggling because, of course, they have to sell, because they're saying, okay, the lifeline of the company is at stake. But then they forget what you said, that is the empowerment of people. And then it's all about sales, but then how can you actually act better as an enabler? And this part, I think, is essential because it's super hard to do. And even as an advisor, my role, when I see these kind of things and I make them notice this kind of issues, and I said, what are you enabling in people, right? And he goes like, oh, I'm delegating. And I was like, delegating is not enabling, right? And I'm focusing on the sales, or I'm focusing on closing the deals. But then you have a little bit of the opposite, which is a kind of anarchy in the company, because everybody does whatever they feel is right, and sometimes is aligned with the purpose of the company, sometimes is not. And it's a challenging moment, especially in an I would say in an environment where, like a startup, which is very fragile, because if you are in a massive corporation and you have momentum, that's a little bit, that there is gonna be hard times, but the company still produces and still runs. But in a startup, it's very easy, it's very fragile. So I'm thinking, is there something that we can share with the audience, saying, even if you are in this situation, and we do understand that the lifeline of your company, but sometimes taking that extra effort to really clarify your mind, to clarify the objectives, to clarify the metrics and the North Star is worth the time, even if it's not directly related to sales.
It's not only necessary, there is no alternative to that. That is where, like you very well said, people in organizations get it really wrong, with the assumption that delegation and empowerment are the same thing, and they're totally not. Delegation, the way I picture delegation is like, here I have something, a package, I give it to you, off you go, because you are 100% capable to do the job. And so it's kind of, I remove a weight from me and I pass it over to you. And then at the end of your journey, what most likely is going to happen, I'm going to blame you because you didn't do A, B, C, D, and E. Voila. And that's the typical delegation end of the story. Empowerment, the metaphor I use, is a tango. Empowerment is a tango. You dance, and in a tango, there's always somebody who leads the dance that has more experience, that has somehow the role to lead the dance. But there is no way you never let the other person go, because the other person if you want to need you, and you need the other person. If you want the tango to work, you have to dance together. And so when you empower somebody, you cannot withdraw yourself from that process. You need to prove, like you just said, clarity, information. And clarity, like you said, is clarity in purpose, is clarity in information, is clarity in deadline, timeline, in scenarios that all information that if you are in a privileged position, that you have more experience and you have this information, you want somebody else to do the job properly, why are you keeping all that information for you? And I tell you why. Is that where information is power, and then you keep it for yourself so that you can keep your power and your status. That's pretty sad. In other cases, it's actually even worse than that. It's laziness in a way, not to do your homework. When you empower somebody, you got to have clear in mind, where are you sending that person to? You cannot, research tells us over and over that if you empower somebody with a blank sheet, they will most likely undershoot compared to what you were expecting. And from time to time, overshoot and do actually damages by overdoing certain things.
Sure.
So if you want to empower somebody, you need to provide the necessary structure for that person to really do well.
Carlo, in your opinion, when you face this, because I think this is the struggle, and I would say that I will try to be very blunt, but I'm not bragging, or I'm not, let's say, I don't want to point the finger on one structure or another, but what I observed is that by working in Asia, in the States, the structure is a little bit more flexible. And in Italy, we have this issue of excess of support, meaning that when you have an employee, they all have all the rights and not the, how do we say, the duty, no? And it's very hard. While in Asia, somebody can say, okay, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. Here, off you go. These are your month of salary. Please go out. But what I notice is that a lot of people are more driven by doing well, because then you become an asset for the company. So in this structure of excessive assistentialism, I would say, how do we break this kind of habits? Because then on the other side, like you said, you do want to lead, you do want to have structure, but then on the other side, you also have to have the people that are receptive enough to do so. And I was having this problem, very simple. I ground it right away. A startup that I'm working with, I was tasked in giving them that structure. So I developed the project management system, and accounting for the hours, because they were spending too many hours on a project, and then you have a lot of friction, and you have a lot of how do you say, pushback from the people. Oh, I don't want to sign in the hour. I don't want to write the project management, or I don't want to write down the project. I'm designing stuff. I shouldn't spend hours on filling up an Excel sheet, it's a fair point, but even in the process of trying to explain how this could benefit you and say, so you are not stressed, work is going to be more organized, blah, 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 but you still have a lot of pushback. So in the terms of holacracy, how can we break these barriers? How do we get people on board, if we can?
So I don't want to get overstuck at holacracy as one system, okay. But my suggestion would be to go into like exactly what you were describing, this land in the middle where we want to empower people, and then we have to deal with the pushback, and we have to deal with either not a very good leader or not a very good employee, let's say, and because that is the land of management. I love that area, because that is where management and wisdom is. People who cut corners, or leaders who cut corners by using their authority and power to get things done, they are allowing so many things to fall through the cracks, because you have the illusion that you're getting things done, and you have no idea what you're missing out in terms of how much more people could have done if you actually had enabled them differently. True. Right? So there is this illusion that the leaders get things done, and they get things very well by pushing and with the hammer all the time. In reality, if you try differently, you can get amazing higher value from your collaborators. The problem with trying differently is that one solution, when it comes to structure, like you said before, doesn't fit all. And research also tells us that there is actually such a thing as too much structure or True. Too much support. Like you were just saying, if it is too much structure, it becomes actually micromanaging. If there is too much support, it becomes actually assistentialism, like you were saying. Is like you never. It's like the mother who never let the child go, right? So, but that's where I argue that's exactly where leadership and management art need to grow, in understanding that we are not anymore in the time of Fordism, where an efficient solution would work for all, and I can produce millions of cars once I get my level of efficiency and I keep nailing on the efficiency. That word is gone. We are now in what we call it the knowledge time, the knowledge industry. So we're dealing with constantly learning new things and acquiring new information, and therefore the one solution fits all doesn't work. The workforce that we have is very different in the level of personal development. Some people come with great personal experience. Some people are still stuck, depending on the company culture where they come from. So they're all different. To learn as leader and manager to deal with that difference. So I always say you have these three volumes, which is structure, support, and clarity. Okay. Every employee with whom you work will need, like a mixer, and more or less structure, more or less support, more True. Or less clarity and information. That's it. And you are the DJ. You are there. You need to learn to do that. Voila. That's what I see.
It's absolutely fantastic, because although I love to read and I love to inform myself on all the latest news, all the latest tools, etc., the older I become, the more value I give to very old tools and models that I say, if you apply it well, it's fantastic. And in my time as an educator, I was like you, leading a department. So I had several reports, I would say, and one of the things that I found myself analyzing in my first 2 weeks when I was appointed was I wrote down this very simple 2x2 matrix, the famous skills and will metric, and you say, okay, where these people lay on this metric. And this is something, I don't know, I think it was developed in the 60s, Carlo, if I remember correctly, right? The skill will metric. And just says...
Could be, I don't want to...
Sorry?
No, I say it could be. I don't want to say yes, and then I'm not sure, but yes, it could well be. It's a long. It's one of the early.
But it works perfectly, because it says if you have high skills and low will, then you need to empower. If you have high skills and high will, you need to delegate. If you have low skills and low will, you need to guide. And every person that falls into different quadrants, you actually have a different kind of management style. And of course, you also need, like you said, at one point you also need to face with the fact that maybe some people are just not a fit. But they're not a fit personally, like they're not a fit for that specific role, for that specific company. And this is something, one of the oldest I think lessons on human resources that I learned. And when I talk about this in other corporations, sometimes I see a lot of wide eyes, and they were like, oh really? And I was like, absolutely. Education is a great master of that, meaning that you can't teach the same thing to 20 students or to 15 students the exact same way. One student will react in a way or in another. And one of the things that I always share with, even if I am in the corporate world, I said I learned more about management in my teaching years than running an agency or running a studio for many years, because the purpose was different. My goal was, I want you to understand. I want you to be able to take this knowledge and then, walk with your legs. And it changed. I cannot fire one of my students. They are there. So,
Absolutely.
and it's wonderful. And I always say, if a lot of leaders would experience this approach and say, okay, no matter what, you need to transfer knowledge, it would have changed the dynamics of a company or an organization completely.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you're touching on a very, unfortunately, when you talk about education, it's wonderful to hear the way you approached education, but the reality is also that, again, for the sake of efficiency,
True.
the whole education system went another way. They started to create courses with hundreds of people inside the courses, with prefabricated learning outcomes, and pretending that one person teach and 100% will learn automatically in the same way, as long as they do what the one person tell them to do, which is the homework or read the thing. And guess what? It doesn't work like that, because every learner is different.
It's different.
You're talking about transforming other people. This is not a transaction even of knowledge, because the way we learn, it varies very differently. If it's all about transferring knowledge, it might even work. But actually, we are in education and in training in organization.
True.
Transferring knowledge per se, it's only the first step. Then people need to acquire skills through that knowledge, right? That's by doing stuff. And then even later, they need to acquire new behavior and attitude, which means I don't only master the skill, but I apply regularly in my daily working life because I know the value of it. Further, they have to enter into a new mindset where they see this behavior is really the way I see the world. And that's why I am good at it. And that's why I master it, because it makes sense in my vision of the world. So knowledge is nothing but the beginning of the learning journey. And yet we structure most of the learning in organization and in education around the way we would transfer knowledge, which is so much more transactional.
I laugh because I remember clearly, and I share this tiny story, when I think it was, I don't know, week 2 of my teaching career. I was super young, and I loved the idea of teaching, but I wasn't a teacher at all. I came from the industry. I was an entrepreneur and a designer at the time. I'm still am. I'm a business designer now, but I came from the practice, and so when I was the teaching practice was new to me, and I reached out to one of my colleagues. She was a teacher for a long time. Her name was Danny Javas, and she was a wonderful art teacher. fine art is also an artist, and I asked her, I said, Danny, how do I do this thing? I don't know anything about teaching. And she looks at me with all the calm in the world and said, okay, listen, there are only three things in teaching: you tell them, you show them, you make them do it, and that's it. And since then I always carried this, this small peel of saying, okay, I need to tell them, I need to show them, and I need to make them do it. And it seems trivial in a way, but it's not. It's that simple. But sometimes, most of the time, we yell at people what to do, and we miss the two other parts. We don't show them how to do it, which is the structure that you were talking about, and you don't allow them to do it, the clarity. And most importantly, you don't allow them to do it in the sense that, like you said, off you go, but then you don't double check. If I was, imagine you were teaching this way. I say, okay, this is, modernism, blah, blah. Okay, you use this structure, this is the composition or whatever, or this is mathematics, these are the equation, goodbye. And that's it. There is a lot of that knowledge missing, which is, okay, I show you how to actually solve the equation if we want to talk about mathematics, and then you let them do it, and then you say, okay, you've done it, and there are some flaws, and let me show you, let me correct you, let me give you some critical feedback about that. And I feel this part.
Gianluca, imagine in what we call now the VUCA world, right?
Absolutely.
It's even become an old terminology now, but volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, where while you are empowering somebody with your knowledge and with your know-how in general, in the meantime, circumstances around you are changing.
Absolutely.
And so there is even that additional, and we still live with that assumption that people should just go and do stuff without enough support. Alone in the VUCA world, even the most expert people, they can't go too far because, like I just said, the environment around is changing, and make the solutions that we knew used to work before, after 3 weeks or a month or 3 months, all of a sudden they don't work anymore. So what do I do when I stumble upon these walls constantly if I am alone? Isn't that far too much to ask in organization to people? And that's why leaders need to learn to be there and dance the tango with their people. They don't have another role. That's exactly what they're asked to do, leaders. That's what they're asked to do. That is the job of a real leader, or the job of leadership, if we want to be a leader, invested leader, because that's another interesting topic. If we bring leadership at the center and not necessarily the task of leading somebody, leadership is interesting because in teams, everybody can exercise leadership in different ways, by supporting each other, by sharing information, by suggesting addition of structure. It doesn't have to be one person. We can do that collectively as a team. And that's what Google learned very fast in their what is called the Google Aristotle project. The team can be empowered to self-manage as long as they get these things right: the structure, the clarity, the purpose, the meaning. They work collectively on these things. They don't need one person to run the shots.
And I believe, I want to know if you agree, this is not a size issue. You can have 3 people and work perfectly, or 3,000. The core, the elements are the same, right? So
I completely agree. As long as we understand that, again, you need to nest these practices in teams and in circles, then you can scale it up. But if you start giving one person the responsibility to do everything what we just said, supports, clarity, structure, to 20, 25 people, then of course they will cut corners, because who has the time to dance the tango simultaneously with 25 people? You can't. So you have to nest these principles into teams that are a normal size of teams. And then you can scale it up into thousands of people in your organization.
That's amazing. So let's try to synthesize all these key points. I love to do this in the show, because I feel is a wonderful exercise of synthesis. If we have to, distill our conversation in 3 key points, what would they be? So number 1, what do you say, Carlo? I have an idea.
So you go.
Okay.
You help me with number 1. Come on.
For me, the first thing is clarity and focus are the base of every great leading decision. If we don't have clarity and focus, you cannot lead, with or without leader, I would say.
I love that one. And in clarity, we need to also make a distinction there that we didn't have the time to make, but it's important. The clarity of saying, this is what we know and this is what we don't know.
Exactly.
It's as good. When we say clarity, it doesn't mean we have to have all the information. It's actually clarity of what we know and what we don't know.
Knowing what we don't know.
Exactly. This is so important that a leader, they have to start learning to share what they don't know, not only what they know. There's no such a thing as a heroic leadership anymore, where I'm supposed to have all the answer. It's faking it in a VUCA world. So you want to help your people have the clarity that you just said of what we know and what we don't.
And this was, I want to bring this from that book of... and you were telling me the story that was related to the hospital that says the hospital that get better are the ones that were filing the most number of help me out, errors. So
errors and mistakes. Yes, absolutely. That psychological safety, it's the concept that comes out of the fearless organization that says teams that perform up to 10 times better than any other teams are the one that are able to share all the information on the table among them, including mistakes, disagreement, timeline, deadline that they couldn't meet, and so on. Because the fastest you share this information with the rest of the team, the faster the team can learn and use that information actually as a trampoline for a new solution.
True.
That was what was discovered with those hospitals, that it was not a matter of making more or less mistakes. It was a matter of how good are we learning from our mistakes, disagreement, because that's actually the new golden mine of any organization that at the moment is completely not leveraged. Mistakes and disagreement are seen as undiscussable or are seen as unacceptable, and therefore discarded. Actually, that's a gold mine for innovation and for learning and so on.
No, I share this, and maybe this could be our point too. I always say that failure identifies our next step. There is this concept, and I would say this is our fault in a way, and when I say our, meaning educators, that when people fail, it means you fail, you're stupid. You fail, you are ignorant. You fail, you are not smart enough, which is not the case. If you look at, you have 3 young children, right? If they play with Lego and they want to make a construction and they don't, it breaks, right? So they try to pile it up and then it falls down. They don't feel ashamed. They just laugh and they start over and they try to make it in a different way. So we should learn from our children and say, okay, failure is part of the development. But we need to embrace it. Of course, we have to say there are some things that we can fail at and some things that you cannot fail at. That's very important, because if you are an heart surgeon, you cannot say, oh, okay, I cut the wrong artery, the guy is dead, too bad. No, but you can say, let me try to, maybe in the process, how do I avoid that failure? By being rest enough, by being having the right team, by not overworking, by being the room being very well lit. So if you,
I'm sorry, I'm conscious of time, but this is too important, Gianluca. We need a new language for failure in organization. If you have all the information and all the skills to perform a task, that is the kind of failure that we are not supposed to do. But if you have all the information and all the skills, but the environment around you is changing in a way that information and those skills do not produce necessarily always the same outcome in a changing environment, that's the type of failure where we need to be able to learn from very fast. True. Because that's exactly where we craft the new solution. And then if you're failing because you're trying to innovate and you're trying to create something new, that's even a more desire. Those are the failures that we actually desire. We want to fail as fast as possible in the process of innovation. So failure per se has this negative connotation, but as a matter of fact, if we learn how to distinguish the type of failure, we understand that first of all, there are all sources of learning, but also some failures are really not acceptable. True. But other failures are actually even desirable, like in the innovation phase.
Yeah, in growth hacking, they don't call it failure, they call it experiments, which is a nice language to say, okay, let's run an experiment. I'm trying to do an experiment and say, okay, let me figure out how this podcast thing works. And this was an experiment for me, right? I started and I say, okay, I'm gonna write and record a couple of episodes, and here we are now in the third season, right? And it is a wonderful experiment. And so we have clarity and focus, knowing what we know.
I think that was actually number 3 and 4. Huh? That was number 3, 4, and 5.
It was. But the third one I want to pinpoint. It takes 2 to tango. It's too beautiful of meaning that
that's a great one.
I think this one is
meaning that really, if you want to if you want to enable instead of just delegate, you need to stay there and be ready to support, to give structure, to give clarity, depending on who is your dancing partner.
Absolutely. So, Carlo, thank you so much. And if we want to follow you, what's the best channel in your opinion? LinkedIn, probably?
LinkedIn, definitely LinkedIn. That's where I try to be and stay more active. Yes. So, Carlo Giardinetti, if you look for me. Yes. I have quite a peculiar surname, so there are not many of them.
So just because we run, especially in US and Asia, Carlo Giardinetti is CarloGiardinetti. So I would say that we have to finalize this. You can be leading with no leaders as soon as we are able to expand our reach and truly change the way that we approach leadership and understand that we need to empower people, and that's the only single most important role of every leader, is to empower others. This is GLC Live. I'm Gianluca Cinquepalmi. Super thank you to Carlo Giardinetti. If you enjoyed this podcast and videocast, subscribe and comment to our podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. For references and links, there is going to be a lot of material on this one. Please visit glc.live. Thank you, Carlo.
Thank you.